All right, this lecture is on happiness, the science of subjective well-being. Certainly a topic that I know attracts a lot of interest, not just among students, but really people in general. So I'm gonna review. Here we go. I'm gonna review several factors that are related to subjective well-being. And subjective well-being is just psychologist's term for happiness. We can say that there's more components to subjective well-being than merely happiness, but when psychologists talk about subjective well-being, they're generally talking about happiness. So, several factors related to subjective well-being, including causes, the societal influences, outcomes, how psychologists measure subjective well-being. And then towards the end of the lecture, I'm going to go over a couple ways to be happier. And these are based on research. So these are empirically demonstrated, means scientifically demonstrated ways to be happier. All right, so here we go. What an important topic, right? When people describe what they want out of life, happiness is very frequently at the very top of the list. When I think about what I want for my children, I want them to be healthy, I want them to be successful. But most parents say that what they want for their children, they just want their children to be happy. So, it's clearly an important topic, and it's important to the field of psychology to really understanding what is happiness. Okay, so this is where it gets a little dry and boring, but that's what scientists do, is you really try to break apart a psychological construct and you study it and you say, what is this thing called happiness? What does it consist of? And then not only that, where does it come from? How do people get it? And then what are the outcomes? So psychologists refer to happiness as subjective well-being. Okay, it's just this idea that we're happy and we think that our life is going pretty well. That's subjective well-being. Subjective well-being you can think of kind of as a process, and it results from certain causes that are internal to us, and certainly from factors out in the world that would be external to us. Okay, so there's both internal and external causes of subjective well-being that influences how we feel as well as our behaviors. And of course, subjective well-being is not just this good feeling to have, okay, feeling that you're satisfied and you're happy with your life, but it's a important factor in contributing to future outcomes. And that can be your health and well-being, that can be your success at work. So it's good not only in and of itself, but it's good because it relates to other positive outcomes in our life. All right, so a lot of people like self-help books, seminars, webinars, TED Talks. There's all kinds of information out there about happiness and what it is and the key to happiness. But like I said, it's for psychologists and scientists and researchers that really want to understand subjective well-being. The starting place is to define what it is. And the way that psychologists have come to define subjective well-being is to think about three types of happiness and the combination of these three types or these three components as being subjective well-being. All right, so subjective well-being refers to life satisfaction, positive feelings, and low negative feelings, and the combination of all of these things in its entirety is subjective well-being. All right. So when we talk about life satisfaction, an example would be thinking that your life is going great, or being satisfied with your job being satisfied what you do for a living, being satisfied with what you're presently doing if you're not working, like if you're a student, for example. And so different causes of life satisfaction would be having a good income, right? I'm satisfied with my life because I'm making enough money to survive and generally have the things that I need, like my basic needs are met. I'm feeling satisfied with my life because I'm achieving my goals, whether that's my academic goals or my goals at work, or even things related to volunteering or helping others. So I'm achieving my life goals, and then generally having a high self-esteem. When we think about a internal factor is also a cause of life satisfaction. But it's important to contrast that with another view of happiness, which is having positive feelings. Okay, so when we're talking about positive feelings, would be feeling like, oh, I'm just really enjoying my life. I'm experiencing all of these positive feelings and positive emotion because it's like I'm really just liking my life right now. Maybe it's fun, maybe it's interesting, maybe it's enjoyable. Okay. The other examples of having a lot of positive feelings is that I'm loving the people in my life, and I feel all of this positive emotion because I've got these strong relationships and I'm able to give and receive love. So causes would be supportive friends, these strong social relationships where there's fun, there's laughter, there's interest. There's actually, in romantic relationships, there's, you could say, love or, being amorous. Doing interesting work, okay? So work that is fun and interesting and enjoyable, getting up and going to work in the morning and it being very enriching and fulfilling and interesting. And then in terms of going to internal causes, people that are extroverted generally have more of these positive feelings, more positive affect in their life, often because they have more social relationships, often because they're more outgoing. So that would be an internal cause. And then the third thing would be a lack of bad stuff, a lack of the negative feelings. So not experiencing chronic worry, very rarely feeling sad or very rarely feeling angry. So really an absence of the negative. Okay, so it's not just the presence of the positive emotions, but it's the absence of the negative. So what are some reasons why people have low negative affect? One, we've talked about the personality dimension of neuroticism. Neuroticism is the disposition or the tendency to experience negative emotions, okay, and to experience them frequently and to experience them intensely. So people that are low in neuroticism just don't experience the same amount of negative emotions, and that's a good thing because they're happier. Also feeling like one's goals are in harmony, okay, so that we don't experience conflict between different areas and domains of our life. So if we think about being a student as well as being like a good son or daughter, being a good friend, or pursuing one's interests, maybe their exercise or athletics, or maybe their hobbies, but feeling like all of the things, all of the goals that one wants to accomplish, they're in harmony and they're not in conflict with each other. Because indeed, having stress, having anxiety, feeling angry, that can happen because you're pursuing different areas of your life and they conflict with one another. Okay, like being successful in school often means less time for fun and social relationships, or family obligations might detract from that same thing, fun and social relationships. It might also detract from school. So feeling as though you're kind of all of your goals are kind of pulling in the same direction, or at the very least don't conflict with each other. And then generally having a positive outlook on life, so being an optimist versus a pessimist. Pessimists often experience negative emotions because of their outlook on life, and that's of course a bad thing for happiness. So ideally, it'd be nice to have all three. Okay, and so the very lucky people we would say score highly in all three. Okay, are satisfied with their life, enjoy their life. Would say that on a daily basis they have positive emotions. They feel like their life is enjoyable, and are experience a lack of negative emotions and feelings. But it's not always the case. And that's why psychologists have said it's very important to consider these three different types of happiness, and that subjective well-being is an overall evaluation or assessment of each of these three. So take, for example, you could think of somebody that is towards the end of their life, like somebody who is maybe like a grandparent, and they've said, overall, I think my life has really been great. I got married, I had kids, they had kids, I've got all these beautiful grandchildren. I worked, I was able to support my own family. Now that's done, I've retired. I own my home, so I'm not, like too stressed out by that kind of stuff. However, when you're old, you see your friends pass away, and maybe you've lost a spouse, and you have to deal with aging, and your body starts to break down, and you can kind of sense that your years are limited. So, despite a high level of satisfaction with the life that one has led, there could be an absence of some of the positive feelings. Indeed, many older folks report quite a bit of loneliness because they don't have the social relationships that they used to younger in their life. And then there could be some negative emotion, okay, some worry about health-related worries and things like that. So that's a good example of where there might be a high level of life satisfaction. There could be less positive emotion and higher negative emotion. Take also the example of somebody that has a lot of positive feelings. Maybe you've got friends like this. I often think that young people can be, especially, not all, sorry, I don't mean to stereotype, but younger people especially might kind of just be living for the moment. They're about going out and having fun and enjoying their friends. Maybe not being so financially responsible, but like having experiences and trying to go on vacations. But they might say to themselves, but I'm just not so satisfied with my life. Is what I'm doing really meaningful? I'm kind of living for me. I'm living for the moment. We could describe it almost as living in a kind of a hedonistic type of a way where people are seeking fun and pleasure, but they might reflect and say, but what am I going to do in 10 more years? Or what, at this rate, am I going to have a good job? Am I going to have a career? I mean, I'm just, I'm working like a food service job right now. That's, and I just spend all my money and I try to have fun. So am I really satisfied with my life? Am I making a good income, or am I on a path to make a good income? And am I really living up to my goals and my full potential? So anyway, this is just to say that it's possible to score high on one dimension but lower on others, and a full evaluation or assessment of one's subjective well-being needs to consider all three. Okay, so where does subjective well-being come from, or what could we say, what would be some of the determinants or causes? Well, there are internal factors. And so the first internal factor would be research has established that subjective well-being or happiness is an inborn temperament. That is, there is a biological basis. There's a heredity factor, so that there's genes or a combination of genes that can be inherited from one's parents. that result in more of a disposition or a temperament to be happy. And that's been established with twin studies. So studies of twins, identical twins that are raised apart, indicate that there are genetic influences on happiness, because even twins that are raised apart, brought up in different life circumstances, tend to report very, very similar levels of subjective well-being. So there's bound to be a temperament, and then in earlier lectures, I've discussed this idea of the interaction between genes and environment, such that when little babies are born to have a temperament in which they experience more positive affect and are easier babies, that will lead their caretakers to interact with them will lead them to interact with them more and in different ways, from infants that are more fussy or colicky or whatever. So inborn temperament how you're born as a baby ends up having these downstream long-lasting effects on happiness. Okay. Similarly, temperament leads to personality, and again, it's a complex interaction between genes and environment. But personality starts being inborn. Okay, so it's partly inborn and partly learned, but it ultimately plays a significant role in happiness. So, for example, people that are extroverts. So one of the big 5 dimensions is extroversion, and we can be extroverted or introverted. Most of us are in between, of course. But people that are more on the extroverted end tend to have more positive feelings. Okay. On the other hand, there's neuroticism. Okay, so you can be either high or lower in the middle on neuroticism. But people that score higher in neuroticism tend to experience more negative feelings. So there's temperament and personality are 2 internal causes of the experience of happiness. Then there's outlook on life. So a person's outlook comes into play in the sense that some people develop habits of noticing good things in life and interpreting ambiguous events in positive ways, while other people unfortunately develop negative, we could say, habits of mind, and that leads to more unhappiness. Okay, so where they've just learned to interpret ambiguous or uncertain events in their life as either being more negative or having negative implications for them. Okay, so cultures also influence whether we take a more optimistic or pessimistic view of life. Okay, so it depends on, some people grow up in groups or cultures that either reinforce having this more negative or positive outlook on life. 4th factor would be resilience. Some people just have a knack for bouncing back quickly from negative events or from losses. And so people that have resilience, or at least learn to develop resilience, tend to have higher subjective well-being. Okay, so certainly there's external causes of subjective well-being as well. The first of these would be sufficient material resources. And so when we mean material resources, we're talking about a roof over our head, food to eat, money. Really, that's a big one. Okay, so people that struggle on a daily basis for their basic nutrition or for shelter or for safety, they're in danger. These are all significant barriers to happiness. And in earlier lectures, we've talked about Maslow's hierarchy, and indeed Maslow at the very bottom of his hierarchy had that we're motivated to take care of our physiological needs. We have to eat, we have to drink. And then we also have certain safety needs, like that could be literally, physical safety, warmth, shelter, etc. So the idea is that we can't be the best person that we can be unless we've taken care of these very basic needs. And while that theory has been criticized, there is that consistency that we find here among researchers that study subjective well-being, is that without sufficient material resources, it's very difficult to be happy. It's also important to have a sufficient amount of social resources. And by social resources, we're talking about the love and support of family, friends, of different types of people. It could be teachers, it could be mentors, it even could be a good boss at work. Certainly people differ in their need for social contact. And it is true that some people need other people less, and some people need other people more. There is a continuum, there is a range, but it's fairly well established, and I believe most psychologists or people that study psychology would agree that at a very basic level, everyone needs some amount of support from others and trust from others in order to feel like they're living a fulfilling life, okay, a life that they can be satisfied with. Third one would be living in a desirable society. Certainly, we can take efforts into our own hands in order to influence our own happiness. But a big constraint on whether or not we can take efforts into our own hands is the society in which we live. So most of you that are listening to this anyway are very fortunate to live in a society in which the basic standard of living is very high, and in which the government and other kind of what we could say government structures are generally fair, okay, and not corrupt. So if we can imagine people that live in third world countries, where they live in societies where there's extreme hunger, there might be conflict and war, there's corruption in the government, they're much less happy, in which compared to people that live in first world industrialized nations, where generally speaking there's quite a few resources, and whether those are educational resources, being able to go to school, being able to get medical care, feeling like you've got a government that is generally trying its best to create policies that are in the best interest of the people. All of these things that people often take for granted and are critical of, rightly so. It's completely fair to be critical of one's government, but that is in comparison, people in first world countries do that really as a luxury compared to people in third world countries. So certainly, when we compare the spectrum of first world nations to third world nations, living in a desirable society has a big influence on happiness. Okay, and that is demonstrated by research. And so what you see here is a map of the world, and the different colors of the countries reflect the self-reported subjective well-being of the citizens of those countries. And in the map, the life satisfaction ratings are color-coded. So green is higher, more life satisfaction. And then the red is at the very lowest level, indicating the very lowest life satisfaction. There's a couple gray areas on the map. So I think you'll see a couple here, here, here. So those are just areas of the world that were too dangerous or inaccessible to be able to do the research. So people from these countries, the question that they answered was this. It's called a ladder. question, a ladder question. And the question is, of course, translated into all the different languages. Suppose the top of the ladder represents the best possible life for you. Okay, the top of the ladder is the best possible life. The bottom of the ladder is the worst possible life. Where on the ladder do you personally stand at the present time, with 10 being at the very top of the ladder and 0 being at the bottom of the ladder? And so what you can actually interpret these numbers as the average response. Okay, so in the green, this is a range, but people are indicating on average pretty high numbers, 7 and 8s out of 10. Where in the red, this is, on average, the numbers are pretty low, only 3 to 4 rungs up on that ladder. And you can start to see some patterns with the color-coded countries. Much of North America and Europe are relatively high in life satisfaction. Okay, these are generally Western industrialized nations. Much of Africa, unfortunately, rates very, very low in life satisfaction. And so, unfortunately, many of these countries, their people struggle with some very basic needs: food, nutrition, running water. There's disease. There can be lack of educational resources. So there could be, and again, I'm hopefully not speaking in too broad of terms, but we can say generally speaking, this is what the data show. And if we look at some of the features of the societies in which people report that they have higher life satisfaction and lower, it is fairly clear that a lot of that corresponds to having living in a society in which some of the basic, very, very basic needs are met for a majority of people. Okay. Now, that doesn't mean that in North America, and let's just take the United States, it certainly doesn't mean that there aren't people in our country that live in third world conditions. Indeed, there are. Okay, there's inner cities, there's rural areas where access to clean drinking water is an issue. Okay, it's shameful in our country, but that occurs. Okay, but not for the majority of people. Okay, for the majority of people in the U.S., these are not issues, but for the majority of people in other parts of the world, they are issues. Okay, so the society that we live in plays a big role, and in general, societies that are politically stable, economically stable, are free from war and conflict, have much higher subjective well-being than those that do not. Okay, and again, it is important to show that there are exceptions. Okay, so kind of painting in very broad brushstrokes, and I don't mean to convey that in the United States everybody is happy, or depending on in some African countries or Asian countries, or that everybody is not satisfied with their life. Clearly not. We're talking about averages, and there are absolutely exceptions. There are people that are happy despite having very undesirable external circumstances. So there are people that live in poverty. There are people that get sick, and they find a way to be happy. Similarly, there's many people that live in abundance. Okay, they're rich. Okay, they have just about every material thing that they want, but they're dissatisfied or otherwise unhappy with their life. Okay, so it's absolutely true that external factors, okay, including the society that one lives in, including sufficient material resources, including having friends, these external things are very important, but there's also the internal factors. okay, our temperament, our outlook on life, those also play a decisive role in determining subjective well-being. So in looking at a person, you really have to look at both the external as well as the internal. And it is true that there are exceptions. So despite very poor external conditions, a person's internal disposition can result in them being happy. Or despite having great external conditions in one's life, people can have a negative outlook and be unhappy. Okay. But let's just make sure that we're talking about averages too. I don't want that to get lost. Okay? And especially when we look at that world map, let's take a hard look at that world map and understand that there are differences by country on average. Okay, so I'm a stats teacher, so I'll say there is an average and then there is variance around the average. It means not everybody's average. Okay, some people are going to be higher, some people are going to be lower. We're looking at averages. So that's important to remember. All right. In terms of one of those external factors, I think that this is, always a question that people are going to have, and I'm sure you all have your own opinions about this. It's the question of whether money makes people happy. And I'll just share the punchline, which is yes. Okay, it does. But it's a certain level. And I'll share some specific research with you on the next slide, but generally what the research finding is that it's a certain level of income that's necessary to meet basic needs. Once those basic needs are met, there are diminishing returns of money, okay? So we can say, yes, money makes people happy, but only up to a point. So that once you hit that point, more and more money doesn't make much of a difference. And here's some of the reasons and some of the factors that goes into this kind of diminishing returns of money, is that while money can certainly raise one's level of life satisfaction because it provides access to basic needs and resources, when people pursue money, valuable things are often sacrificed in order to earn it. So that could be relationships, that could be job satisfaction. In other words, people don't do what they're passionate about. They just take on a job to make a lot of money. So the pursuit of money can actually be harmful to happiness. And there's also the danger of having one's aspirations kind of perpetually rising so that people kind of feel poor no matter how much money they have. Okay, and this is due to the social comparison process. It's the keeping up with the Joneses, is that we got the job, made the money, bought the expensive house, bought the expensive car, and then you look at your neighbor's driveway and they have a better car than me and their house is a little bit bigger. And then you went inside and it's nicer. So it's that reference point starts to shift and shift and shift, and so do aspirations. So it's chasing money that ends up leading to happiness. So instead of chasing money, research has shown that emphasizing relationships and other areas of life besides just money is a good strategy. The goal is to achieve a level of income that allows one to live comfortably while being able to balance the other factors that are associated with subjective well-being. Okay, like enjoying one's life, enjoying one's friends, not being stressed. Okay, so it's how can one come up with that right amount of income that is going to make one satisfied and make one comfortable and not sacrifice the other aspects. That would be the goal. Now, to say that there are diminishing returns, and when you hear psychologists talk about this, they're mostly going to reference a couple studies, but this one in particular by Kahneman and Deaton, which was done in 2010. Okay, so I think that these graphs show pretty clearly the diminishing returns. So you'll see that there's several lines on this graph. Okay, there's a line that reflects positive affect, so this is feeling positive emotion. There's lines reflect feeling not blue. So sometimes feeling blue means that you're feeling down, you're feeling sad. And so this line just represents like the extent to which people don't feel blue. This line represents that latter question. You can think about it as living your best life versus your worst life, okay, from a scale of 0 to 10. And then generally reporting that one's life is stress-free, okay? So that's what we're looking at. So this was done in a very, very, very large sample, I believe 450,000 US residents, just before 2010 when the study was published. And so just specifically, we've got the positive affect was measured by asking people how much enjoyment and happiness they have in their life, as well as the extent to which they smile and laugh. Okay, so that's how positive affect was measured. The not blue question was questions that had to do with the extent to which they experienced worry or sadness. And I believe the time frame was yesterday. So think about yesterday. To what extent did you have enjoyment, happiness, and smile and laugh a lot? Okay, versus think about yesterday. To what extent did you experience worry and sadness? And then this reports of stress was, I think, they just asked to what extent did you feel stressed yesterday, and then I already defined the latter question. It's basically living one's best life, 0 to 10. So what you can see is for three of those questions, three of those outcomes, there's very clearly this trend where starting at $10,000 and then going up to $75,000, which was household income, by the way, that there's this trend where there's an improvement in positive affect, there's an improvement in feeling not blue, there's an improvement really in terms of the proportion of people that are reporting, okay? Let me speak more precisely, okay? There's a higher percentage of people reporting more positive affect, that they're not blue and stress-free, up to $75,000 in terms of household income, and then there's this leveling off effect. So you don't get a much higher percentage of people reporting positive affect, that they're not blue or that they're stress-free, over $75,000. There's this very clear leveling off effect. Okay, and so the researchers, the conclusion of the study is that they said beyond $75,000 a year in household income, there's no improvement whatsoever in any of these three measures that measure emotional well-being: positive affect, feeling not blue, and feeling stress-free. So the other measure, of course, okay, so there's that. So in terms of one's emotional well-being, if we define happiness as emotional well-being, leveling off effect at $75,000, okay. But now let's look at this latter question, which is scale of 1 to 10. 10 is the top of the ladder, you're living your best life. 0, you're at the bottom of the ladder, you're definitely not living your best life. We can see that these are the proportion of people that are, I believe, given the top rating. You can see that there is this increasing effect of income, and that does not level off, even all the way to the very tippy top. And there's people that earn obviously more than $160,000, but they just cut off the graph here because we're talking about a very small percentage. So up until whatever income limit this is, 160 plus, that captured the majority of people. So you know, that's worth knowing, is money matters only up to a point, especially when it comes to emotional well-being, feeling positive affect, feeling not blue, and feeling stress-free. When it comes to those measures, when feeling like one is living their best life, there does seem to be this effect where having more money will result in more people reporting that they're living their best life. Okay, so there is that. I think it's interesting to talk about humans' ability to adapt to their circumstances. And so this process of adaptation is important to understand. When good and bad events occur, people often react strongly at first, but their reactions adapt over time, and they return to their former levels of happiness. This is related to a phenomenon that I've lectured on earlier, which is affective forecasting. Is that we tend to be not a great judge about how future events are going to make us feel. Okay, so this is a related phenomenon. Is that we tend to have kind of a poor barometer on how we expect to feel, and then relatedly, when something good happens, sure, we experience a little bit of a spike, okay? So that when a very happy event happens, like a wedding, in those surrounding days or in the surrounding weeks, we get that spike in happiness. But then we return to our baseline levels, okay? And then when asked, well, how do you feel now that you got married? Okay, if you ask people right away, it's like, oh, it's the happiest day of my life. But then, how are you feeling right now, a month later? Well, I don't know. I guess I feel pretty good, right? So we return to our levels of happiness. And that's good and bad, okay? So when we get married, there's this feeling of the day of our marriage, we're euphoric, best day of our life, okay? But then over time, we get used to being married. And I can tell you, after many years of being married, you definitely don't have euphoria every single day. Far from it. So maybe that's not so good. But then the other way of looking at it is after there's something really traumatic that happens, okay? Car accident, being diagnosed with an illness. There might be quite a bit of anxiety, fear, but that can go away over time. Those bad feelings fade and subside. So even something like unemployment, that can take a while. There can be more persistent life events where people don't adapt as quickly, and kind of chronic unemployment is definitely one of those. All right, so here's a kind of very salient example of an illustration of adapting to circumstances. So this is a graph of a single person named Harry. We'll just say I don't know if that's his real name, but we'll just say that this person was Harry. This person was in a research study on subjective well-being, and in the study, the participants in the study had to report their daily moods. Okay, and so what you can see is that high numbers or positive numbers above this line of 0 indicates a positive daily mood, whereas points below the graph, or below this line, indicate a negative mood. So it turns out that this particular student who was in the study had Hodgkin's lymphoma, which is a form of cancer. And so you can see, so this was this person who was living with lymphoma. You can see that his moods went up and down. Okay, and a few times it dropped into the negative zone down here. Mostly staying positive though. Okay, so most of the time he's reporting positive moods. About halfway through the study, they were able to track this. Harry was told that his cancer was in remission. Okay, And so that's right around this time. So there's this big spike in positive mood. But then notice how quickly he adapted. Okay, even just a couple days later, he's basically down to the same kind of levels of positive mood that he was previous to getting the news. Okay, perhaps fewer of these negative spikes. Okay, so maybe these were some bad days here related to his illness. But even after receiving what I would think would be the best news that he had ever gotten in his life, is that he was in remission and effectively cured, he adapted back to his typical daily mood. It's basically, this is a typical pattern. And while this is a kind of an extreme example, this is a typical pattern that is found among other people. There can be a strong response to an event, either positive or negative, and then kind of a lessening of intensity over the time. So we adapt to our circumstances. Okay. So aside from the obvious, seem to be like the obvious benefits of, hey, it's just good to be happy, like experiencing positive emotions, and not having negative emotions, that's an inherently good feeling. What are some other outcomes of having high subjective well-being? And this is a link that I've obviously clicked on here, but that goes to a table that will show you some of these outcomes. But there's a lot of good outcomes of subjective well-being. So the benefits of being happy are many, and so one of these is that people that are happy just end up being healthier, as in physically healthier. They're less likely to get sick. They're less likely to be diagnosed with illness or disease. And a lot of that has to do with the component of subjective well-being that is avoiding or having low levels of stress. Another benefit is that people with higher subjective well-being are often more sociable than unhappy are. And so this results in a higher likelihood of having more friends, a larger social support network. And you can see how that's kind of a reinforcing cycle, is that the more sociable one, the more happy one is, the more sociable one will be, the more of a social network, which results in more happiness. Happy people are generally more productive, especially at work, and that happier people are better citizens, and that they are more likely to engage in volunteer and civic activities. So many benefits to both the individual as well as to other people, as well as to organizations and society, to have happy people in the world. How is happiness measured? Primarily using a self-report methodology. So if you want to know how happy people are, you ask them. So this is a very common scale that's used, so a satisfaction with life scale. It's 5 items in which people respond the extent to which they agree or disagree with the following 5 items. And you can see that this is really meant to measure the life satisfaction component of subjective well-being versus the kind of positive affect or lack of negative affect. So this is all about satisfaction with life. Similarly, a kind of a similar scale is known as the Flourishing Scale. Similar approach. There are statements to which people either express agreement or disagreement, in this case on a 7-point scale. And this is, again, really meant to get at that life satisfaction aspect of subjective well-being, asking about the extent to which people lead a purposeful and meaningful life, have social relationships, feel competent, feel like they just live a good life. So self-report methodology, and I've mentioned some of the other very simple ways to get a subjective well-being as well, like the very simple ladder question. Okay, imagine the ladder, top rung, bottom rung. Where are you on that ladder? All right, so let's talk about some ways to be happier. Of course, people wish they could be a little bit more satisfied with their life. Even if people are happy, who wouldn't want to be more happy? I said it at the top of the lecture. There's all these people out there in the world that are that try to write books, self-help books, or give a webinar or a seminar, or have a TED Talk about the secrets to happiness. And there's often these suggestions or even prescriptions about how to be a happier person and achieve more happiness. But the thing is, those are often really oversimplified. One, because happiness has different components. Okay, like we've talked about, there's these 3 different components: satisfaction, positive affect, and a lack of negative affect. And having a general suggestion or prescription, like if you just do this, you will be happy, that doesn't take into account everybody's individual situation. Okay, the short of it is there's no one size fits all approach. Okay, so with this in mind, knowing that there's no secret sauce out there, there's no key, the one size fits all key, it's important for each of us to think about ways that we can actually be happier and be thoughtful and reflective based on our own situations. Okay, and so this is by no means meant to be an exhaustive list, but these are some questions that are worthy of consideration. So the first thing would be this: what are some things in your life that could be changed to make life more meaningful and or happy? Okay, and it's important to focus on things in your life that could actually be changed. That is, they're controllable, or you could find a way to take control. If you think that there are certain barriers or obstacles to your happiness, how could those be removed? And what has kept you from removing them? Okay, so again, rather than it's great to listen to inspirational people on the web, to give their talk about, hey, here's all you have to do to be happy. It's kind of like one of these miracle drugs or cures, right? If you just drink this or take this pill, you're going to be beautiful and lose weight, and everybody's going to like you. And that's often the approach that people take to happiness, but it's not the case. Is we have to consider our own path to happiness, and one of those is to just think about the things in your life that could be changed, and if those things were changed, your life would be more meaningful or more happy. Here's another thing to consider. Do you generally see the bright side of things? Do you look at the glass as half full or half empty? Would there be any way that you could, if you tend to see the glass as half empty, you could change your outlook on life? Would there be a way that you could develop more positive mental habits? Okay. One thing that and I'll talk about some specific things that I think could actually be helpful, but in terms of seeing the brighter side of things, the expression of gratitude is often the best way to do that. So it can be very easy in life to think about how things are not going well, or maybe not as good as they could be going. And in some cases, that's legitimate, to be sure. But for most of our normal everyday life, it's a matter of saying, okay, some things are not going well. Noted. What is going well, and what can I be happy about? Third one, are there people around you that make you feel good and make your life more enjoyable? do you surround yourself with good people? If you don't, and if there are a certain number of folks in your life that are toxic or they're just downers, is it possible to avoid or at least limit contact with those people that are truly downers or toxic? So uh, we know that being socially isolated can be very damaging. It can be a risk factor as well as a consequence of depression. Okay, and so then on the flip side, having the presence of strong, healthy relationships can not only be a buffer against the negative, but it can really increase the positive. So fun, engagement, and indeed, I'm completely aware that current situation, the way that life is, it can be very difficult to have those social relationships for many reasons. But to think about ways in which you can surround yourself with people that are going to make your life more enjoyable. Okay. And again, this is not meant to be an exhaustive list, but these are just 3 questions that it's a small number of questions that you can address to really start to think about making some changes if you're not as happy as you would like to be, or if you are happy, to even be happier. Here's another one. Seek to make others happy and help others versus just receiving support from others. The happiest and healthiest people are often those who help others. And so to be more happy, it might be helpful to focus on your personal relationships and seek to make others happy. Beyond actually helping others, expressing gratitude to the people in your life, and giving and being a person that gives a lot of compliments. Okay, and honestly, there can be self-interest in here. I believe that there's the term altruism, which means giving help or support for having no personal gain. But I would even say that it is very difficult to say that there is truly a pure altruism, because what the research shows is that by helping others, you make yourself feel good. So there is inherently a self-interest, even if you are just giving to others. Okay, you're helping a friend, you're helping a family member with whatever it is, work around the house, helping them in school. Okay, and you expect nothing in return, knowing that you're going to get something in return, that positive, good feeling. I would say it's not a purely altruistic act, but anyway, it might be splitting hairs, but we feel good when we help others. And then, this is a big one. You're students and you're pursuing a degree, and hopefully you have your eye on the career that you would like to pursue when you're outside of school. But we know that people report that they have more satisfaction in their life. They have purpose and meaning and satisfaction when they find work that they love and they experience mastery. So it's not just finding work that you love, but it's that you're good at it. So on a regular basis, you are getting feedback that you're a competent person. And so having those feelings of competence lead to happiness. So, if you're not getting that in some domains of life, find it in others. I know many students, it can be hard to be a straight A student. So define for yourself whatever it is that will make you feel like you've achieved a level of competence. And that can be that you've improved your grade. So if you've been, say, a C student for a while, and then you can get a B on a test, hey, that's demonstrating mastering competence. And there will be happiness that results from that. All right, let me just get even more specific, especially with the idea of gratitude, because these are some very easy and specific things that you can do that will that are related to the experience of gratitude, which is very, very strongly associated with with positive emotion and the experience of happiness. Okay, so and these are all, so I've got these in parentheses, I've got these people's names. So this means that there was a research study that was done and was published in a peer-reviewed scientific journal that demonstrates that doing these interventions or these activities is related to happiness. Okay, so the first of these is to write a gratitude letter, to just write a letter to somebody expressing your gratitude for your relationship. It can be a friend, it can be a family member, it can be a mentor, but write them a letter. It doesn't have to be a long letter. I suppose it could be an email, but write a letter. Suppose it could even be a text message. It just doesn't have the same feeling, does it? No. Go formal on that one. Write a letter. Okay. 3 good things in life. Write 3 things that went well each and every day for a week. And then if you like it, keep doing it. Keep doing it for 2 weeks and 3 weeks. Do it every day. Okay. But it's really just focusing on being an optimist, not being a pessimist, expressing gratitude, and really focusing on what are 3 things that went well. The count the blessings, this seems kind of generic. I'm sure you've been given this advice, perhaps by your parents or other loved ones, to count your blessings, but to actually do that in a formal way. So recall events for which you are grateful and write them down each day for a week. So this could be you're grateful that you have a job right now. You're grateful that you have such a great friendship. You're grateful that you have maybe that you are that you've got a park by your house that you can go to and just walk around the park and spend some time outside. I mean, these don't have to be a big deal, but just think about anything in your life that you're grateful for. And this can be present moment, or this can be in the past as well. So you might recall events from growing up or from your childhood that you look back on that moment and you say, hey, I'm really grateful that that happened. All right. 4th one, spend some money on someone else. I know that money can be difficult to come by. I realize that. However, there's good news. Spending just as little as $5 makes people more happy than spending it on themselves. Okay? And it will make you just as happy as if you spent $20. Okay? So think about somebody that you know. Think about what they like. Just a very small little token of your gratitude, your relationship. It's like, hey, I'm just going to get you this little $5 gift. It could be food or beverage or whatever it is. But the act of doing that and giving to others, and I don't want you to miss the finding here. Spending it on others and not on yourself is the key. So spend money on others, and it's just as good to spend $5 as it is to $20. So, okay, so those are some specific evidence-based suggestion. Don't take my word for it. Do it yourself, and then you can see how you feel. So you could think about if there was some very easy way to be able to track your mood, say for a week. Just do that. Scale of 1 to 10. How good was I feeling today, or how good am I feeling right now? Okay, before you go to bed, scale of 1 to 10. How good am I feeling right now? Do it for a week. See where your baseline is. Then do one of these interventions, and then see if that will lift your happiness. This research would suggest that on average it will. Maybe not work for everybody, but on average there should be an effect. Okay. I think I'd like to conclude by saying, it's ultimately, it can be kind of a Western ideal that we have to be happy. And that in other parts of the world or other countries in the world, I think that perhaps they place less emphasis um, on this idea that we have to be happy, particularly in the feeling that we have to experience the positive emotion all the time. I do think that that can be a Western ideal, and I think that it can be a trap to fall into, is feeling like if we're not kind of stereotypically happy, okay, like I'm positive, I'm feeling good, I'm enjoying life, it's interesting, it's fun, okay, that if we're not feeling that way, that we're not happy, and there's something wrong with that, okay. Um, there's many times in life, especially when we pursue the other aspects, like having a life of meaning and satisfaction. Okay, we want to feel like we have a life of meaning. We don't feel very happy most of the time because I have to go to school and I have to go to work and I'm busy and I'm kind of stressed and I think life is kind of sucking right now, and so I'm not very happy. And so the living in the United States in particular, seeing people living these amazing lives on social media, that people are having fun and enjoying themselves and everybody's living a better life, it can definitely be a trap to fall into. I don't think that other countries place nearly as much emphasis on this need to feel positive emotions nearly so much as we do. So I would just say that is it can be in some ways a a trap to pursue happiness. Is that in pursuing, and there can be this ironic effect that in the pursuit of happiness, we actually experience a lot of sadness because we're always kind of comparing our current level to some aspiration that we think that we should have that we never get to. I hope that's not the case. I hope you all get to whatever level of happiness that you're seeking. But I do think that these gratitude interventions are very important and they're very powerful because I think, well, this is my opinion, but I think it would be substantiated by some research that at least one of the keys, probably a major one, not the only one, but a major key, is finding a way to feel happy and feel grateful for what we have versus what we don't have. Okay. I think a basic amount of income makes a big difference too. Don't get me wrong. I think that that's a major deal. Okay, but aside from that, it really is about not chasing this elusive, positive feelings and happiness, and that I gotta be to support. It's just like, you know what? Just feel grateful for what you have right now. Not to say that you shouldn't aspire to more. You're in school. You're pursuing a career. It is absolutely not wrong at all to want to aspire to have a good job and make a good income and make more money and even to have more friends. These are all things to aspire to. Okay, I want you to aspire to have those things, but in the process of getting there, it's being grateful for where you're at in the present moment, and not kind of falling into the trap of always chasing this elusive feeling that I think we're never going to get. So anyway, that was, I'm sure, more than you wanted to hear, but hopefully that resonates with some of you. And I do hope that after hearing this lecture, you have a better understanding and appreciation for how psychologists have studied happiness, the way that they define it, some of the causes of happiness that are both internal and external, and indeed that you've got a couple practical suggestions for just trying to be more happy on a regular basis.